The scream that echoed through the mountains that night wasn't human. It wasn't animal either. It was something primal, something ancient, a sound that made my blood run cold and my hands shake on the steering wheel. I'd been driving these treacherous mountain roads for 20 years, but nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to encounter. My name's Jack, and I'm a long-haul trucker. That night, I was hauling a load of electronics from Seattle to Denver, taking the scenic route through the Cascade Mountains. It was late October, and a heavy mist hung in the air, making the winding road ahead barely visible in my headlights. I just passed a sign warning of hairpin turns when I heard it, that bone-chilling scream. At first, I thought it might be the wind howling through the trees, but deep down I knew better. This was something else entirely. I slowed the rig, squinting into the darkness beyond my windshield. The forest pressed in close on both sides of the road, the trees looming like silent sentinels in the night. That's when I saw it. A flash of movement in my side mirror. My heart skipped a beat as I caught a glimpse of something massive darting between the trees. It was too big to be a bear, too fast to be a moose. Whatever it was keeping pace with my truck, which was cruising at a steady 50 miles per hour. I pressed down on the accelerator, feeling a bead of sweat trickle down my spine. The engine roared as we started climbing a steep incline, the rig straining against the grade. I flicked on my high beams, desperately trying to get a better look at what was following me. Big mistake. In the harsh glare of the lights, I saw it clearly for the first time. It was at least 8 feet tall, covered in thick, matted fur. Its arms were impossibly long, swinging by its sides as it ran with an eerie, loping gait. But it was the face that haunted me, a twisted, almost human visage with deep-set eyes that reflected the light like twin pools of fire. Bigfoot. It had to be. I'd heard the stories, of course. Every trucker worth his salt had tales of strange sightings in the wilderness. But I'd always laughed them off, chalked them up to too many long nights and too much bad coffee. Now, faced with the impossible, I did the only thing I could think of. I floored it. The rig lurched forward, picking up speed as we crested the hill. I could hear the creature's heavy footfalls behind us, punctuated by that otherworldly scream. My hands were slick with sweat on the wheel as I took the curves as fast as I dared, the trailer swaying dangerously behind me. I fumbled for the CB radio, my fingers clumsy with fear. Breaker, this is Big Jack. Anybody out there? I've got a situation up here in the Cascades." Static crackled through the speakers, broken by a drawling voice. "This here's Midnight Rider. What's your situation, Big Jack?" I swallowed hard, knowing how insane I was about to sound. "I'm being chased by something, Ryder, something big. I think it might be Bigfoot." There was a long pause before Midnight Rider responded. "You been dipping into the bottle tonight, Jack?" "I wish I had," I muttered, checking my mirrors again. The creature was still there, matching my every move. "I'm dead serious, Ryder. This thing is real, and it's after my rig." "Where you at exactly?" Midnight Rider asked, his voice tense now. I squinted at a passing road sign. "Just past mile marker 147 on Highway 2, heading east towards Stevens Pass." "All right, Jack. I'm about 20 minutes behind you. Hang tight, and I'll see if I can't catch up. 20 minutes. I wasn't sure I had 20 seconds, let alone 20 minutes. The creature was getting closer, its massive form filling my side mirror. I could see its mouth now, open in a silent roar, revealing rows of jagged teeth. Sharply to the right, hugging the edge of a steep cliff. I took the turn hard, feeling the trailer start to fishtail behind me. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought we were going over, but somehow, I managed to wrestle the rig back under control. The creature wasn't so lucky. Its momentum carried it straight into the guardrail, which crumpled like tin foil under its bulk. I heard a roar of surprise and pain as it tumbled over the edge, disappearing into the misty darkness below. For a moment, all I could hear was the pounding of my own heart and the rumble of the engine. Had it really fallen? Was it over? My relief was short-lived. A massive, hairy arm suddenly slammed onto the hood of my truck, followed by another. The creature hauled itself up, its eyes blazing with fury as it glared at me through the windshield. I yelled in terror, swerving wildly across the road. The thing clung to the hood, its claws leaving deep gouges in the metal. Its face was inches from mine now, separated only by the glass. I could see every detail of its inhuman features, the broad, flat nose, the heavy brow, the lips pulled back in a snarl. In desperation, I slammed on the brakes. The sudden deceleration sent the creature flying forward, tumbling across the asphalt ahead of me. I didn't hesitate. I gunned the engine, aiming straight for it as it struggled to its feet. The impact shook the entire rig. I felt a sickening thud as the wheels rolled over something solid. In my rearview mirror, I saw a massive, fur-covered form lying motionless on the road behind me. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep the wheel straight. I wanted nothing more than to keep driving, to put as much distance between me and that thing as possible. But a nagging voice in the back of my mind wouldn't let me leave. I had to know for sure. Slowly, hesitantly, I brought the rig to a stop and set the brake. I sat there for a long moment, listening to the tick of the cooling engine and trying to gather my courage. Finally, I grabbed my flashlight from the glove compartment and climbed down from the cab on unsteady legs. The beam of my flashlight danced across the empty road as I walked back, my footsteps echoing in the eerie silence. There was no sign of the creature, no blood, no fur, nothing to indicate the titanic struggle that had just taken place. Had I imagined it all? Was I losing my mind? That's when I saw them, massive footprints in the soft shoulder of the road, each one easily twice the size of my own boot. They led off into the dense forest, disappearing into the undergrowth. I stood there, flashlight in hand, staring at those impossible tracks. Part of me wanted to follow them, to prove to myself once and for all that what I'd seen was real. But a deeper, more primal part of me knew better. Whatever that thing was, it was still out there, watching and waiting in the darkness. The sudden blare of an air horn made me jump. Headlights appeared around the bend, and I recognized the familiar outline of Midnight Rider's rig. I'd never been so glad to see another human being in my life. Ryder pulled up alongside me, leaning out of his window with a concerned look on his weathered face. "You all right, Jack? You look like you've seen a ghost." I shook my head, still staring at those tracks. "Not a ghost, Ryder. Something a whole lot worse." Together we examined the scene. Ryder whistled low when he saw the claw marks on my hood and the mangled guardrail. "I'll be damned," he muttered. "You weren't kidding about this, were you?" I told him everything, the chase, the creature on my hood, the impact. Ryder listened in silence, his expression growing more serious with each passing moment. When I finished, he laid a hand on my shoulder. "I've been driving these roads for 30 years, he said quietly. "Whispers of things in these mountains that don't rightly belong in this world. Never believed them myself until now." We stood there for a while longer, two men faced with a reality we couldn't quite comprehend. Finally, Ryder cleared his throat. "Sun'll be up in a few hours. I'll follow you to the next truck stop. Reckon neither of us should be out here alone tonight." I nodded gratefully, casting one last glance at the dark forest before climbing back into my rig. As we pulled away, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that somewhere in those shadowy woods, something ancient and powerful was biding its time, waiting for its next encounter with the world of men. The drive to the truck stop was tense, every shadow on the road seeming to hold some new threat. But as the first rays of dawn began to lighten the sky, I felt the fear begin to lift. In the harsh light of day, the events of the night seemed almost dreamlike, too fantastic to be real. But I knew the truth. I had the claw marks on my rig and the memory seared into my mind to prove it. The world was bigger and stranger than I'd ever imagined, and I'd been given a glimpse behind the veil. As Ryder and I sat in the truck stop diner nursing cups of strong coffee, I made a decision. I'd keep driving these mountain roads, it was my job after all. But I'd do it with a newfound respect for the wilderness and its secrets. And maybe, just maybe, I'd keep a more open mind the next time I heard a fellow trucker's tale of something strange in the night. After all, in a world where Bigfoot could chase down a semi on a mountain road, anything was possible. Story 2. The night I met the men in black, I learned that some truths are better left unseen. It started with lights in the sky and ended with a warning that chilled me to my core. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to that fateful evening on Route 50, where the Nevada desert stretches endlessly under a canopy of stars. I'm Dale. Been driving trucks for nigh on 3 decades now. That night I was hauling a load of electronics from Reno to Salt Lake City. It was a run I'd done 100 times before, but this trip would be different. This trip would change everything. The cab of my Peterbilt was quiet except for the low rumble of the engine and the occasional crackle of the CB radio. I just passed through Fallon, the last real town for miles, when I first noticed the lights. At first, I thought it was just another truck coming up behind me. But as I watched in my mirrors, I realized these lights were moving all wrong. They dipped and weaved in impossible patterns, far too fast for any earthbound vehicle. I blinked hard, wondering if the long hours on the road were finally getting to me. But when I looked again, the lights were still there, closer now. They pulsed with an eerie, otherworldly glow, blue, green, and a color I couldn't quite name. My hands tightened on the wheel as the lights suddenly shot forward, passing over my rig in complete silence. There was no rush of air, no sonic boom, nothing to indicate that a solid object had just flown by at impossible speeds. I caught a glimpse of it as it passed, a disc-shaped craft, sleek and metallic with no visible means of propulsion. It hovered for a moment above the road ahead, then shot straight up into the night sky, vanishing among the stars. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear the engine. I eased off the accelerator, my mind reeling. What had I just seen? A secret military project or something not from this world? I reached for the CB radio, my hand shaking slightly. Breaker, breaker. This is Long Haul Dale. Anybody out there see something strange in the sky just now? Static filled the cab, broken by a gruff voice. Dale, this is Dusty. Again? I let out a shaky laugh. Wish I had been Dusty. You wouldn't believe what I just saw. I described the lights, the craft, its impossible movements. Dusty listened in silence, and when I finished, there was a long pause before he replied. Dale, he said, his voice low and serious. My old man used to run these routes. He told me stories. Said there were things out in the desert that don't belong in this world. I always thought he was full of it, but now, just watch yourself, all right? I promised I would and signed off, feeling more unsettled than ever. The vast emptiness of the desert suddenly felt oppressive, hiding secrets in its dark corners. About an hour later, I pulled into a small truck stop to fuel up and grab some coffee. The place was deserted except for a bored-looking attendant behind the counter. As I filled my thermos, I debated whether to mention what I'd seen. In the harsh fluorescent light of the convenience store, it all seemed so unlikely. That's when I noticed the car. It was parked at the far end of the lot, a black sedan so clean it seemed to absorb the light around it. I couldn't make out a license plate or any identifying marks. As I watched, two men got out and started walking towards the store. They were dressed identically in crisp black suits, white shirts, and narrow black ties. Both wore dark sunglasses despite it being the middle of the night. Their movements were stiff, almost mechanical as they approached. A chill ran down my spine. I'd heard whispers about men like these, the so-called men in black who showed up after UFO sightings, silencing witnesses and confiscating evidence. I'd always dismissed it as another crazy conspiracy theory, but now, the bell above the door chimed as they entered. The taller of the two approached the counter while the other hung back, scanning the store. His gaze landed on me, and even through the sunglasses, I could feel the weight of his stare. "Excuse me," the tall one said to the attendant. His voice was flat, devoid of any accent or emotion. "We're looking for a truck driver who passed through here recently. He may have witnessed an unusual aerial phenomenon." The attendant shrugged. "Lot of truckers come through here, mister. Can't say I remember anyone talking about anything weird in the sky." The man in black nodded, then turned to me. "Perhaps you can help us, sir. Have you seen anything unusual on the road tonight?" I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. Every instinct was screaming at me to lie, to get out of there as fast as I could. But something in the man's tone made it clear that he already knew the answer. I saw some strange lights," I admitted. "Probably just a weather balloon or something, right, huh?" The corner of the man's mouth twitched in what might have been a smile. "Indeed. Weather balloons can be quite misleading. Perhaps we could step outside and discuss what you saw in more detail." It wasn't really a request. I nodded, following them out into the parking lot. The desert night had turned cold, and I suppressed a shiver that had nothing to do with the temperature. "Now then," the tall one said, "why don't you tell us exactly what you witnessed?" I recounted the event, trying to keep my voice steady. As I spoke, the shorter man produced a small device from his pocket. It looked like a pen, but when he clicked it, a red light began pulsing at the tip. "This is a standard memory adjustment tool," he explained, his voice as flat as his partner's. "It will help clarify your recollections of tonight's events." I took an involuntary step back. "Look, I don't want any trouble. I won't tell anyone what I saw, I swear." The tall one cocked his head slightly. "We appreciate your discretion, mister." He paused, glancing at a small notebook. "Carpenter, 42 Elm Street, Reno, Nevada. Father of 2, divorced, 29 years with your current employer." My blood ran cold. I'd never told them my name, let alone all those details about my life. Who are you people?" I stammered. "We are tasked with maintaining the equilibrium between what is known and what must remain hidden," the tall one said. "The universe is vast and complex, Mr. Carpenter. There are truths that humanity is not yet ready to face." The shorter one raised the device. "This won't hurt. You'll simply forget the anomalous events of this evening. Your route will have been uneventful as always." I held up my hands. "Wait, please. I don't want to forget. Even if I don't understand it all, what I saw tonight, it was amazing. It made me feel like there's so much more out there, like the universe is bigger and more wonderful than we can imagine." The two men exchanged a look. For a moment, I thought I saw something almost like surprise flicker across their impassive faces. "You wish to retain this knowledge?" the tall one asked. "Understanding that you can never speak of it to anyone, that you will carry this burden alone, I nodded firmly. "I do." There was a long pause, then to my amazement, the shorter one lowered the device. "Very well, Mr. Carpenter," the tall one said. "You may keep your memories, but know this. We will be watching. One word to anyone about what you've seen, and we will not be so accommodating next time." I nodded again, relief washing over me. "I understand, thank you." "Do not thank us," the shorter one said. "Knowledge is as much a curse as it is a gift." With that, they turned and walked back to their car. I watched as they drove away, the black sedan seeming to melt into the darkness of the desert night. I stood there for a long time, my coffee growing cold in my hand, trying to process everything that had happened. Part of me wondered if I'd made the right choice. Would it have been easier to forget, to go back to a simpler world where the skies held no mysteries? But as I climbed back into my rig and set off down the lonely highway, I knew I couldn't have chosen differently. The memory of those lights dancing across the star-filled sky filled me with a sense of wonder I hadn't felt since I was a kid. The universe was vast and strange and filled with secrets, and now I was keeper of one of those secrets. It was a heavy responsibility, but also an incredible gift. As the miles rolled by, I found myself glancing more often at the sky. The endless expanse of stars seemed different now, filled with possibility and mystery. I may never fully understand what I saw that night, or who those men in black really were, but I know this. The truth is out there, hidden in plain sight for those who are willing to look. And me? I'll keep driving these long, lonely roads, eyes on the sky, always watching for those mysterious lights. Because now I know we're not alone out here, not by a long shot. Story 3. The abandoned car on the side of the road seemed innocent enough, but when I pulled over to help, I never expected to step into a nightmare that would haunt me for years to come. They say no good deed goes unpunished, and on that moonless night in the middle of nowhere, I learned just how true that can be. My name's Mike, and I've been driving semis for the better part of 2 decades. I've seen my fair share of strange things on the road, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened that night on Route 287 in eastern Wyoming. It was pushing 2 a.m., and I'd been driving since noon. The long, straight stretches of highway had a way of lulling you into a trance if you weren't careful. I was fighting to keep my eyes open, the white lines on the asphalt blurring together in the glow of my headlights. A car pulled over on the shoulder, hazard lights blinking weakly in the darkness. It was an old model, maybe from the 90s, and even in the dim light I could see it had seen better days. Now I know what you're thinking. Every trucker knows the stories about highway robbers using broken-down cars as bait, but something about this scene felt different. Maybe it was the genuine rust on the car's frame or the way the hazard lights flickered erratically like they were running on a dying battery. Whatever it was, I found myself easing off the accelerator, guiding my rig onto the shoulder behind the stranded vehicle. I figured I'd at least check to make sure everyone was okay. If something felt off, I could always drive away. I set the brake and climbed down from the cab, my boots crunching on the gravel. The night was eerily quiet, no sound but the idle of my engine and the faint click of cooling metal from the car ahead. "Hello," I called out, approaching cautiously. Anyone need some help?" No response. I circled around to the driver's side, peering through the window. The interior was dark, but I could make out a purse on the passenger seat and some papers scattered on the dashboard. It looked like someone had left in a hurry. That's when I noticed the driver's door was slightly ajar. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cool night air. Something wasn't right here. I took a step back, my hand instinctively reaching for the flashlight on my belt. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the area around the car. That's when I saw them. Footprints in the loose dirt leading away from the vehicle and into the sagebrush beyond the shoulder. Common sense told me to get back in my truck and drive away. Call the highway patrol and let them deal with it. But I couldn't shake the image of someone, maybe a young woman, given the purse wandering alone in the wilderness. "Hello?" I called again, louder this time. "Is anyone out there? Do you need help?" The vast emptiness of the high plains swallowed my words. Nothing but silence in return. I hesitated for a long moment, then made a decision I'd come to regret. I followed the footprints. The brush was thick, scratching at my arms as I pushed through. My flashlight beam bounced crazily off the scraggly vegetation, creating shifting shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. I'd gone about 50 yards when I heard it, a soft, muffled sound, almost like crying. It was coming from a dense thicket just ahead. "Hello?" I said, softer now. "I'm here to help. Are you hurt?" The crying stopped abruptly. For a heartbeat, there was absolute silence. Then a voice, high-pitched and trembling, spoke from the darkness. "Please," it said. "Please help me." I pushed forward, branches snapping under my feet. "I'm coming," I called. "Just stay where you are." I broke through into a small clearing, my flashlight sweeping the area. And there, huddled at the base of a gnarled juniper tree, was a figure. It was small, wrapped in what looked like a dirty blanket. As my light fell on it, the figure turned, and I caught a glimpse of a pale, tear-streaked face. "Oh, thank God," I breathed, relief washing over me. "Are you all right? What happened?" But as I took a step closer, that relief turned to ice in my veins. Something was off about the person in front of me. The proportions weren't quite right, the movements too jerky and unnatural. The figure stood, the blanket falling away, and I saw... I'm not sure how to describe what I saw. It was humanoid, yes, but twisted and wrong in ways that defy explanation. Its limbs were too long, joints bending in impossible directions. The skin was a sickly, pale gray, stretched tight over a frame that seemed more insect than human. And its face... God, its face. Just dark, empty sockets. The mouth was a lipless gash filled with needle-sharp teeth. I stumbled backward. A scream caught in my throat. The thing cocked its head, regarding me with those eyeless sockets. "Please," it said again in that high, childlike voice that was so at odds with its appearance. "Won't you help me?" It took a step toward me, arms outstretched. I turned and ran. Branches whipped at my face as I crashed through the underbrush, blind panic driving me forward. I could hear it behind me, moving with inhuman speed through the thick vegetation. I burst out onto the shoulder, my truck a looming shadow in the darkness. I sprinted for the cab, fumbling with the door handle as twigs snapped behind me. Just as I wrenched the door open, something grabbed my ankle. I looked down to see a gray, skeletal hand wrapped around my boot, its fingers impossibly long and tipped with wicked claws. With a yell of terror and revulsion, I kicked out, feeling my foot connect with something solid. There was a high-pitched shriek, and suddenly I was free. I scrambled into the cab, slamming the door and locking it in one frantic motion. My hands shook as I turned the key, the engine roaring to life. In the rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of something pale and spindly darting back into the brush. Then I was pulling onto the highway, tires squealing as I floored the accelerator. I drove for hours, my heart pounding, jumping at every shadow on the road. When the sun finally rose, painting the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold, I pulled into a truck stop and sat there, trembling. What had I seen? What was that thing? My mind raced through possibilities, each more outlandish than the last. A mutant? Some kind of alien? Or something darker? Something that shouldn't exist in a sane, rational world? I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew there was a tapping on my window. I jerked awake, half expecting to see that twisted, eyeless face peering in at me. But it was just a state trooper looking concerned. "You all right in there, sir?" he asked when I rolled down the window. "You've been parked here for a while." I nodded, trying to compose myself. "Yeah, just tired. Long night." The trooper nodded sympathetically. "I hear that. Say, you didn't happen to pass through on 287 last night, did you? We got a report of an abandoned vehicle, but when our guys got there, it was gone." My blood ran cold. I didn't see anything," I lied, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. He shrugged. "All right, well, you take care now. Get some rest before you head out." As he walked away, I sat there, my mind reeling. The car was gone? Had I imagined the whole thing? But no, my ankles still throbbed where those impossible fingers had gripped it, and there were scratches on my arms from crashing through the brush. It had been real. All of it. In the days and weeks that followed, I tried to rationalize what had happened. Maybe I'd been more tired than I thought, and my mind had played tricks on me. Maybe there was a logical explanation for everything I'd seen. But deep down, I knew the truth. There are things in this world, or maybe from beyond this world, that defy explanation. Things that lurk in the dark places, waiting for unwary travelers. I still drive the long-haul routes, but never at night if I can help it. And if I see a car broken down on the side of the road, I keep on driving. Call me callous if you want, but I learned my lesson that night. Sometimes it's better to mind your own business, because you never know when a simple act of kindness might lead you into a nightmare. So if you're ever driving down a lonely stretch of highway in the dead of night and you see a car pulled over with its hazards on, just keep driving. Darkness, trust me, you want no part of it. Story 4. I've seen a lot of strange things in my years on the road, but nothing could have prepared me for that night at the Twilight truck stop. What started as a routine fuel-up turned into a nightmare that still haunts me to this day. They say the desert holds secrets, but some secrets are better left buried in the sand. The name's Tom, and I've been hauling freight across the Southwest for the better part of 2 decades. That fateful night, I was on a long haul from Phoenix to Salt Lake City, cutting through the heart of the Nevada desert on Highway 93. It was pushing 2 a.m. when I saw the flickering neon sign of the Twilight truck stop materialize out of the darkness. My eyelids were getting heavy and my fuel gauge was nudging towards empty, so I figured it was as good a time as any to take a break. The place looked like a relic from another era, all faded paint and rusty metal. A handful of semis were parked in the lot, their drivers likely catching some shut-eye in their cabs. As I pulled up to the pump, I noticed there wasn't another soul in sight. The automatic doors wheezed open as I stepped inside the small convenience store. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sickly glow over the dusty shelves stocked with road trip snacks and random sundries. Behind the counter stood a man who looked about as old as the truck stop itself. His skin was leathery and weathered, like he'd spent a lifetime baking under the desert sun. He didn't look up as I approached, his rheumy eyes fixed on a small TV playing an old western. "Evening," I said, fishing out my wallet. "Just need to pay for some diesel. Pump 3. The old man's gaze slowly shifted from the TV to me. There was something unsettling about his eyes. They seemed too large for his face, and the irises were an odd milky color. "Sure thing, stranger," he rasped, his voice like sandpaper on rust. "That'll be $87.50. I handed over my card, trying not to stare at his gnarled hands as he ran the transaction. His fingernails were long and yellow, curving slightly at the tips like claws. "You passing through?" he asked, handing back my card. I nodded. "Yeah, heading up to Salt Lake. Long night ahead." The old man's lips curled into what might have been a smile, revealing teeth that were just a bit too sharp. "Long night indeed," he murmured. "You be careful out there. Strange things happen in the desert after dark." A chill ran down my spine despite the stuffy heat of the store. I mumbled a thanks and turned to leave, eager to get back on the road. That's when I heard it. A low, guttural sound coming from behind the counter. I glanced back to see the old man hunched over, his body racked with what looked like painful spasms. "Hey, you okay there?" I asked, taking a hesitant step forward. The old man's head snapped up and I stumbled back in shock. His face was changing. The leathery skin seemed to be melting, revealing something green and scaly underneath. His eyes had grown even larger, bulging out of their sockets as they turned a sickly yellow color. "What the hell?" I gasped, my back hitting the door. The thing that had been the old man straightened up, its body swelling and stretching until it was nearly 7 feet tall. Clothes tore as limbs elongated, fingers extending into wicked claws. In a matter of seconds, the kindly old clerk had transformed into a nightmarish creature that looked like something out of a B-movie horror flick. Its reptilian head swiveled towards me, a forked tongue flicking out to taste the air. "Going somewhere?" it hissed, its voice now a menacing rasp. I didn't stick around to answer. I bolted out the door, my heart pounding in my chest as I sprinted towards my truck. Sound of shattering glass as the creature burst through the storefront. I fumbled with my keys, hands shaking as I tried to unlock the door. Just as I wrenched it open, something slammed into the side of the truck with enough force to rock it on its suspension. I looked up to see the creature clinging to the cab, its claws leaving deep gouges in the metal. Its yellow eyes locked onto mine, filled with a predatory hunger that turned my blood to ice. With a yell of terror, I hurled myself into the cab and slammed the door shut. Claws scrabbled at the window as I turned the key, the engine roaring to life. I threw the truck into gear and stomped on the accelerator, tires squealing as I peeled out of the lot. The creature clung on, its monstrous face pressed against the driver's side window. I swerved wildly, trying to shake it off, but its grip was like iron. In desperation, I veered towards a row of empty fuel tankers parked at the edge of the lot. At the last second, I yanked the wheel hard to the left. The sudden change in direction was too much for the creature. It lost its grip and went flying, smashing into one of the tankers with a sickening crunch. I didn't look back. I hit the highway doing 80, my hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel. For hours I drove without stopping, jumping at every shadow and strange sound. As the first rays of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, I finally allowed myself to relax a little. Whatever I'd seen back there, I'd left it far behind in the desert night. But then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There, on the passenger seat, was a single curved claw concrete proof that I hadn't imagined the whole thing. I pulled over at the next rest stop and sat there for a long time, trying to make sense of what had happened. Had I really seen a man transform into a monster? Or was it some kind of mass hallucination brought on by exhaustion and the isolation of the desert? Part of me wanted to call the police to report what I'd seen. But who would believe me? I'd be laughed off the force, probably lose my job if word got around that I was seeing lizard men at truck stops. In the end, I decided to keep quiet. I tucked the claw into my wallet as a reminder, a talisman against the darkness I'd glimpsed that night. I still drive that route sometimes, but I never stop at the twilight truck stop. Sometimes, when I pass by in the dead of night, I swear I can see a figure standing in the shadows, watching the road with yellow, unblinking eyes. The desert holds its secrets close, and some truths are better left unspoken. But I know what I saw that night. And I know that there are things in this world that defy explanation, things that lurk on the edges of our reality waiting for unwary travelers to stumble into their grasp. So if you're ever driving through the Nevada desert in the dark of night, and you see a flickering neon sign beckoning you to stop, just keep driving. Whatever comfort it seems to offer, trust me, it's not worth the price. As for me, I'll keep on trucking, eyes on the road and one hand on the wheel. But I'll always be looking over my shoulder, watching for shadows that move a little too fluidly, listening for sounds that don't quite belong in this world. Because now I know the truth. The monsters are real, and sometimes they wear human faces. In the vast emptiness of the American Southwest, where the line between reality and mirage blurs in the heat haze, anything is possible, and not all of it is friendly. So the next time you're out on the open road and you see a lone truck rolling by, give us a wave. We're not just hauling freight, we're carrying secrets, bearing witness to the strange and terrible wonders that hide in the dark corners of this great, wide land. At a truck stop in the middle of nowhere, facing a clerk with eyes that seem just a bit too large, or a smile that's a little too sharp, well, you might want to fuel up somewhere else. Some stops are better left unmade, and some stories are better left untold. But me, I'll keep driving, chasing the horizon and trying to outrun the memories of that night. Because out here on the endless ribbon of asphalt, there's always another mile to go, always another dawn waiting just beyond the curve of the earth. And who knows? Maybe someday I'll find answers to the questions that have haunted me since that night. Or maybe I'll just keep rolling, carrying my story like so much cargo until the day I make my final stop. Either way, I'll be here, wheels turning, engine humming, eyes always watching for whatever strange things the night might bring. Because that's what we do out here on the long haul. We keep moving no matter what. Story 5. The message was there when I popped the hood, scrawled in what looked like dried blood. They're coming. 2 words that turned my routine maintenance check into the beginning of a nightmare. I've been driving trucks for 20 years, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened that night on I-80. Name's Frank, and I haul cargo coast to coast for a living. It was a chilly October evening, and I was about halfway through a run from Chicago to Sacramento. The sun had dipped below the horizon an hour ago, leaving nothing but darkness and the occasional glare of oncoming headlights. I just crossed into Nebraska when I noticed the engine was running a bit rough. Nothing major, but in this business you learn to take care of the little problems before they become big ones. So when I saw the sign for a rest stop coming up, I decided to pull in and take a look. The place was deserted, just a couple of pickups parked way off in the corner of the lot. I eased my rig into a spot near the dimly lit bathroom building and killed the engine. The sudden silence was almost oppressive, broken only by the ping of cooling metal and the distant hum of traffic on the interstate. I grabbed my flashlight and popped the hood, expecting to find a loose belt or maybe a clogged air filter. What I found instead turned my blood to ice. There, scrawled across the engine block in dark, rusty letters, were those 2 words. They're coming. I stumbled back, my mind reeling. How the hell had that gotten there? I'd checked under the hood just that morning in Chicago, and everything had been normal. There's no way someone could have written that while I was driving down the highway at 70 miles an hour. As the initial shock wore off, I leaned in for a closer look. The substance did look like blood, dark and flaking in places, and there was something else, a smell, faint but unmistakable. The coppery scent of fresh blood mixed with something else, something wrong, like ozone and rotting meat. I slammed the hood shut, my hands shaking. This had to be some kind of sick joke, right? Maybe one of the guys at the truck stop in Chicago was playing a prank. But even as I thought it, I knew it wasn't true. No one had been near my truck, and that smell, that wasn't something you could fake. I was debating whether to call the police when I heard it. A low, thrumming sound, more felt than heard. It seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once, making the air vibrate in a way that set my teeth on edge. The few lights in the parking lot flickered and died, plunging the rest stop into darkness. I fumbled for my flashlight, heart pounding in my chest. The beam cut through the blackness, revealing nothing. Just an empty parking lot and the silent bulk of my truck. But the sound was getting louder, a pulsing rhythm that made my head ache. Lights in the sky, moving in ways no aircraft ever could. They danced and weaved, forming impossible patterns before coalescing into a single massive shape that blotted out the stars. I've never believed in UFOs or little green men, but in that moment I knew with absolute certainty that I was seeing something not of this world. The massive craft, if you could call it that, hung silently above the rest stop, bathing everything in an eerie blue-green light. A beam shot down from the underside of the craft, scanning across the parking lot. It passed over the empty pickups, then slowly made its way towards me. I wanted to run, to hide, to do anything but stand there like a deer in headlights. But my body wouldn't respond. I was frozen in place, watching as the beam inched closer. Just as it was about to reach me, a hand grabbed my shoulder. I spun around with a yell, coming face to face with a man, an ordinary-looking guy in his 50s with graying hair and kind eyes. He was dressed like a trucker in jeans and a flannel shirt. "We gotta go, son," he said urgently. "Right now. Get in your rig and follow me." I opened my mouth to ask who he was, where he'd come from, but he cut me off with a sharp gesture. "No time for questions. They're here for you. We've got about 30 seconds before they lock onto your signal." As if to emphasize his point, the scanning beam suddenly changed direction, sweeping back towards us at an alarming speed. "Go!" the stranger yelled, shoving me towards my truck. Something in his voice broke through my paralysis. I sprinted for the cab, hauling myself up and fumbling with the keys. The engine roared to life just as the stranger's pickup peeled out of its parking spot, kicking up gravel. I threw the rig into gear and followed, my tires squealing as we shot out of the rest stop and onto the on-ramp. In my rearview mirror, I saw the beam of light sweep across the spot where we'd been standing moments before. The stranger's pickup was flying down I-80, well above the speed limit. I pushed my rig as hard as I dared, the engine protesting as we climbed a long incline. Above us, the massive craft kept pace effortlessly, that scanning beam sweeping back and forth across the highway. "Who are you?" I yelled into the CB radio. "What the hell is going on?" There was a burst of static, then the stranger's voice came through. "Name's Bill. I'm like you, or I was, before I learned the truth. They've been watching us for years, Frank, marking us. And now they're here to collect..." "Collect? Collect what? Us," Bill said grimly. "Truckers, long-haul drivers. We see things out here on the road, things most folks never notice. Patterns in the landscape, lights in the sky. We're witnesses, Frank, and they don't like witnesses." It sounded crazy, but after what I'd just seen, I was ready to believe almost anything. "So what do we do?" I asked. "We keep driving. There's a place up ahead, a sanctuary of sorts. If we can make it there, we'll be safe, but we gotta lose them first." As if on cue, the scanning beam intensified, focusing on my trailer. I felt a jolt run through the rig, and suddenly I was losing power. The engine sputtered and died, and I was coasting. "They've got me!" I shouted into the radio. "I'm losing power!" "Hang on," Bill's voice crackled. "I'm coming back for you." I saw his pickup make a wild U-turn in the median, kicking up dirt and grass. He came roaring back towards me, passing on the shoulder. "Get ready to jump, he yelled through the radio. "Are you crazy? I can't abandon my rig." "It's the rig or your life, son. Make your choice." Oh. The massive craft was descending now, that beam turning into a solid column of light that enveloped my trailer. I could feel the whole rig starting to lift off the ground. Precision. I threw open the door and leaped, hitting the asphalt hard and rolling. Pain shot through my shoulder, but adrenaline kept me moving. I scrambled to my feet just as Bill's pickup screeched to a halt beside me. "Get in!" he shouted. I dove into the passenger seat and Bill floored it. In the side mirror, I watched in disbelief as my rig was lifted into the air, swallowed up by that impossible craft. We drove for hours, taking back roads and hidden routes that Bill seemed to know by heart. As the sun began to rise, he finally pulled over at a small, nondescript gas station. "We're here," he said, relief evident in his voice. "Where's here?" I asked, looking around at what seemed like just another truck stop. Bill smiled. "Sanctuary. There are others like us here, Frank, people who've seen what's really out there. We look out for each other, keep each other safe." As we walked into the station, I saw the cashier give Bill a knowing nod. A hidden door opened in the back, revealing a staircase leading underground. "Welcome to the Resistance," Bill said, clapping me on the shoulder. "Hope you're ready for a whole new kind of long haul." As I followed him down those stairs, I realized my life would never be the same. The open road I'd known and loved for so long had just become a lot bigger and a lot stranger. But at least I wasn't facing it alone. Whatever was out there, whatever they were, we'd face it together, because that's what truckers do. We keep moving forward, no matter what tries to stop us. And me? I've got a feeling my longest, strangest haul is just beginning. Story 6. The howls echoed through the forest, sending chills down my spine. I'd heard wolves before, but this was different. These weren't the cries of any normal animal. As the sounds grew closer, I realized with mounting horror that I wasn't dealing with wolves at all. I was being hunted by something far worse. My name's Eddie, and I've been driving big rigs for nearly 15 years. I thought I'd seen it all on the lonely highways crisscrossing this country, but nothing could have prepared me for that night in the backwoods of northern Michigan. It was late October, and I was hauling a load of auto parts from Detroit to Marquette. The fall colors were in full swing, painting the landscape in brilliant reds and golds. As beautiful as it was during the day, though, those same forests became downright eerie once the sun went down. I'd been on the road for about 10 hours when I hit a detour. A landslide had taken out part of US 2, forcing traffic onto a network of smaller county roads. It wasn't ideal, but I figured it wouldn't add more than an hour to my trip. Boy, was I wrong. The detour took me deeper into the forest than I'd expected. The road narrowed, twisting through dense stands of pine and maple. My headlights cut through the darkness, creating strange, shifting shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. It was nearing midnight when I saw the first one. At first, I thought it was a deer. A large shape darted across the road about 100 yards ahead, moving with incredible speed. But as my light swept across it, I caught a glimpse of something that made my blood run cold. It wasn't a deer, it wasn't even close. The creature was massive, easily 7 feet tall, with a body that seemed to be a horrific mixture of man and wolf. Shaggy fur covered its muscular frame, and its head was that of a wolf, but with eyes that held an unmistakable intelligence. I blinked hard, sure I must be seeing things. When I looked again, the road ahead was empty. "Get it together, Eddie," I muttered to myself. "You're just tired." Seeing things. But deep down, I knew what I'd seen was real, and I knew I was in trouble. I pressed down on the accelerator, urging my rig to go faster. Curves, the trailer swaying dangerously behind me. I didn't care. All I wanted was to get out of these woods as quickly as possible. That's when I heard the first howl. It started low, almost subsonic, before rising to a pitch that set my teeth on edge. It was joined by another, then another, until the entire forest seemed to be alive with the sound. My hands were shaking on the wheel as I rounded another bend. And there they were. 3 of the creatures stood in the middle of the road, their eyes reflecting the glare of my headlights. They were even more terrifying up close. Saliva dripped from jaws filled with razor-sharp teeth, and their claws looked capable of tearing through metal like it was paper. I laid on the horn, hoping the noise would scare them off. Instead, they seemed to take it as a challenge. The largest of the 3 let out a bone-chilling roar and charged straight at my truck. I had a split second to make a decision: swerve and risk rolling the rig, or plow straight ahead and hope 18 tons of steel would be enough to take down whatever the hell these things were. I chose option 2. I stomped on the gas, aiming straight for the charging creature. At the last second, it leaped, sailing clear over the cab with impossible agility. I felt a tremendous impact as it landed on the trailer behind me. The other 2 scattered as I barreled through, but I could hear them keeping pace in the woods on either side of the road. And above me, on the roof of the trailer, I could hear the scraping of claws as the first creature tried to find purchase. My mind was racing. What were these things? Werewolves? Some kind of mutant wolf-human hybrid? Whatever they were fast, strong, and clearly intent on turning me into their midnight snack. I grabbed the CB radio, my voice shaking as I called out, "Breaker, breaker, this is Big Eddie. I'm on County Road 437 north of Blaney Park. I've got a situation here. Is anybody out there? Over." Static crackled through the speaker, broken by a gruff voice. "This is old Tom. What's your situation, Eddie?" I almost sobbed with relief at hearing another human voice. "Tom, you're gonna think I'm crazy, but I'm being chased by some kind of wolfmen. They're trying to get into my rig. I need help." There was a long pause before old Tom responded. "All right, Eddie. Listen to me very carefully. You've run into a pack of dogmen. They're bad news, but there's a way to shake them." "Dogmen?" I repeated, incredulous. "What the hell are you talking about?" "No time to explain," Tom barked. "There's an old logging road coming up on your right in about 2 miles. Take it. It'll lead you to a clearing with an abandoned church. Get there and you'll be safe. They won't follow you onto hallowed ground." I wanted to ask a million questions, but a sudden impact on the roof of the cab cut me short. Claws punctured the metal, and I could hear snapping jaws just inches above my head. "Hurry, Eddie," Tom's voice crackled through the radio. "And whatever you do, don't stop." I dropped the mic and focused on the road ahead, pushing the rig to its limits. The engine screamed in protest as we took the curves faster than any semi had a right to. Behind me, I could hear the creatures keeping pace, their howls mixing with the wind rushing past the cab. The 2-mile stretch seemed to last an eternity. Twice more, I felt impacts on the trailer, and the roof of the cab was beginning to buckle under the relentless assault. Just when I thought the truck couldn't take any more, I saw it. A narrow dirt road branching off to the right. I wrenched the wheel hard, the trailer fishtailing wildly as we left the pavement. The logging road was barely wide enough for my rig, branches scraping against the sides as we plunged deeper into the forest. Around us now. I caught glimpses of them running alongside the truck, easily keeping pace despite the rough terrain. Their eyes glowed with an unearthly light, filled with a hunger that was all too human. Just when I thought we couldn't go any further, the trees opened up into a moonlit clearing, and there, silhouetted against the star-filled sky, was the church old Tom had mentioned. It was a small wooden structure, long abandoned by the looks of it. The white paint was peeling and half the windows were broken, but in that moment it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. I stomped on the brakes, the rig sliding to a stop just yards from the church steps. For a moment everything was silent. Then, with a chorus of otherworldly howls, the dogmen burst into the clearing. They circled the truck, snapping and snarling. I could see the hatred in their eyes, the frustration at being denied their prey. But true to Tom's word, they didn't approach the church. With trembling hands, I reached for the door handle. It was only about 10 feet to the church steps, but it might as well have been a mile. I took a deep breath, said a quick prayer, and threw open the door. I hit the ground running, my boots pounding against the overgrown grass. Behind me, I heard the dogmen's howls reach a fever pitch. Hot breath on the back of my neck told me just how close they were. With a final desperate lunge, I hurled myself onto the church steps. I felt something slash across my back, tearing through my jacket and drawing blood. But then I was past the threshold, collapsing onto the weathered floorboards of the church's front porch. The howls turned to whines of frustration. I rolled over to see the pack of dogmen pacing at the edge of the church grounds, unable or unwilling to come any closer. I don't know how long I lay there, my heart pounding, waiting for the dogmen to leave. It might have been hours. Eventually, as the first light of dawn began to color the eastern sky, they slunk back into the forest, their howls fading into the distance. When I was sure they were gone, I picked myself up and stumbled back to my rig. The damage was extensive. Deep claw marks scored the roof and sides, and one of the rear tires had been shredded. But somehow, miraculously, it was still drivable. As I climbed into the cab, my CB crackled to life. "You make it, Eddie?" Old Tom's voice came through, thick with concern. "Yeah," I replied, my voice hoarse. "Yeah, I made it. Tom, what were those things?" "There's a lot in this world folks don't know about, Eddie," Tom said gravely. "A lot of things hiding in the dark corners of the map. You be careful out there, you hear? And if you ever need help again, you just call for old Tom. I'll be listening." The radio went silent, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the first rays of the morning sun. As I started the engine and slowly pulled away from that lonely church, I knew my life would never be the same. The open road suddenly seemed a whole lot darker, filled with dangers I'd never imagined. But I also knew I'd keep driving, because that's what we do. We keep moving forward, no matter what tries to stop us. And if there really are monsters out there in the night, well, somebody's got to be there to warn the others. So if you're ever driving through the forests of northern Michigan on a moonlit night and you hear a howl that sounds a little too human, you might want to find the nearest church and maybe say a little prayer for us truckers while you're at it. We could use all the help we can get. Story 7. The diner menu was normal enough until I saw the names. Real names, my name. That's when I realized this wasn't just another truck stop along the highway. This was something else entirely, and I was about to become the special of the day. I've been driving semis for the better part of 3 decades. I've seen my fair share of weird stuff out on the lonely stretches of America's highways. But nothing could have prepared me for what went down at the Crossroads Diner. It was a muggy July night, and I'd been on the road for 14 hours straight, hauling a load of electronics from Atlanta to Phoenix. My eyes were starting to play tricks on me, the white lines on the asphalt blurring together in a hypnotic dance. I knew I needed to stop soon or risk becoming another statistic in the long list of truckers who'd pushed themselves too far. That's when I saw the sign, glowing like a beacon in the darkness. Crossroads Diner, next exit. The sign was old, the paint peeling, but something about it called to me. Maybe it was the promise of hot coffee and a warm meal, or maybe it was something else, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. Either way, I found myself taking the exit, my rig rumbling down a narrow road that didn't seem to be on any of my maps. The diner itself was a squat, unremarkable building that looked like it had been plucked straight out of the 1950s and dropped into the middle of nowhere. A handful of trucks and cars were parked outside, their owners presumably inside grabbing a late-night meal. I eased my rig into a spot at the far end of the lot and killed the engine. The sudden silence was almost oppressive, broken only by the tick of cooling metal and the distant hum of crickets. As I climbed down from the cab, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The air felt heavy, charged with an energy I couldn't explain. A bell chimed softly as I pushed open the diner's door. The interior was exactly what you'd expect. Red vinyl booths, a long counter with chrome stools, and the ever-present smell of coffee and grease. A few patrons were scattered about, hunched over their plates or nursing cups of coffee. None of them looked up as I entered. I slid onto a stool at the counter, nodding to the waitress, a middle-aged woman with faded blonde hair and tired eyes. She gave me a smile that didn't quite reach those eyes and slid a menu across to me. "Coffee?" she asked, already reaching for the pot. "Please," I replied, my voice rough from hours of disuse. "Black as midnight." She poured me a cup, the steam rising in lazy curls. "Take your time with the menu, hon. We've got some special items tonight." I nodded absently, already flipping open the laminated pages. That's when I saw it, and my blood ran cold. The menu started normal enough, your typical diner fare of burgers, fries, and all-day breakfast. But as I flipped to the second page, things took a turn for the bizarre. Instead of dish names, there were people's names. Real names, complete with ages and hometowns. Sarah Johnson, 32, Tulsa, okay. Miguel Hernandez, 47, El Paso, TX. Lily Chen, 19, San Francisco, CA. And there, right in the middle of the page, Calvin, Khaled Reeves, 52, Memphis, TN. My name, my age, my hometown. I looked up sharply, my heart pounding. The waitress was watching me, that same not-quite-right smile on her face. "See anything you like?" she asked, her voice dripping with a sweetness that made my skin crawl. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. I think there might be some mistake with the menu." She cocked her head, her smile widening to reveal teeth that seemed just a bit too sharp. "Oh no, honey, there's no mistake. You're exactly where you're supposed to be." That's when I noticed the other patrons. They were all looking at me now, their eyes glassy and unfocused. As I watched, their features seemed to shift and blur like wax figures melting under intense heat. I stood up so fast I knocked over my stool. "I think I should go," I said, backing towards the door. Got out, impossibly long, her fingers wrapping around my wrist with a grip like iron. Now," she said, her voice deepening into something inhuman. "You can't leave before the main course." I yanked my arm free and bolted for the door, but it was gone. Where the entrance had been was now just a blank wall, covered in the same faded wallpaper as the rest of the diner. I spun around, looking for another way out, but every window, every possible exit had vanished. The other patrons were rising now, their bodies twisting and elongating into shapes that defied description. The waitress, if that's what she really was, stood behind the counter, her form growing larger, darker, filling the space with a presence that pressed down on me like a physical weight. "What do you want?" I gasped, pressing my back against the wall. The thing that had been the waitress smiled, and I saw that her mouth now stretched from ear to ear, filled with row upon row of needle-sharp teeth. "Why, Calvin," she purred, "we want you. Your life, your memories, your very essence. It's been so long since we've had a trucker on the menu." My mind raced, searching for a way out of this nightmare. That's when I remembered something my grandma used to say, that evil couldn't abide the sound of prayer. It was a long shot, but I was out of options. I closed my eyes and began to recite every prayer I could remember, every scrap of scripture I'd picked up over the years. The words tumbled out in a desperate stream, and as I spoke, I felt something change in the air around me. The oppressive weight lifted, replaced by a warmth that seemed to emanate from within me. I heard shrieks of anger and pain, the sound of bodies thrashing against furniture. When I opened my eyes, the diner was in chaos. The creatures were writhing on the floor, their forms melting like candle wax. The walls themselves seemed to be dissolving, revealing the true nature of the place, a void of swirling darkness punctuated by pinpricks of sickly light. And there, in the midst of it all, was a door. A simple wooden door that I knew in my heart led back to the real world. I didn't hesitate. I ran for it, dodging the flailing limbs of the creatures as they tried to grab me. Behind me, I heard the waitress thing roar in fury, but I didn't look back. I hit the door at full speed, bursting through into the cool night air. I found myself back in the parking lot, my rig sitting right where I'd left it. Without thinking, I sprinted for the cab, hauled myself up, and turned the key. The engine roared to life, and I peeled out of there, tires squealing on the asphalt. As I hit the highway, I glanced in my rearview mirror. The diner was gone. In its place was an empty field, as if the building had never existed at all. I drove through the night, pushing my rig to its limits, not stopping until the sun was high in the sky. When I finally pulled into a rest stop, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn off the engine. For a long time, I sat there, trying to make sense of what had happened. Had it all been some kind of hallucination brought on by exhaustion? A vivid nightmare? But I could still feel the bruise on my wrist where the waitress had grabbed me. Could still smell the acrid stench of whatever that place had really been. I knew then that I'd brushed up against something beyond my understanding, something that lurked in the spaces between places, preying on unwary travelers. And I knew I could never look at a roadside diner the same way again. These days, I'm more careful about where I stop. I stick to the big truck stops, the places with plenty of lights and people around. And I always check the menu before I sit down to eat. Because out there on the long, dark highways of America, there are things waiting in the shadows. More than just your wallet or your cargo. Things that want to devour your very soul. So if you're ever driving late at night and you see a diner that seems too good to be true, just keep on driving. And maybe say a little prayer for us truckers while you're at it. We could use all the help we can get out here on the endless road. As for me, I'll keep driving, keep moving forward. Because that's what we do. We face the darkness, we overcome our fears, and we deliver. No matter what tries to stop us, no matter what horrors we encounter along the way, we always deliver. Just maybe check the menu first, okay? Story 8. The woman I delivered the package to wasn't the same woman who signed for it. I know because I watched her face change right before my eyes. One second she was a kindly grandmother type, the next she was something else entirely. That's when I realized I'd stumbled into a world I never should have seen, and my life would never be the same. My name's Ray, and I've been driving delivery trucks for the better part of 2 decades. I thought I'd seen it all, irate customers, bizarre addresses, packages that tick. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened that day in suburban Connecticut. It was a crisp autumn afternoon, leaves crunching under my boots as I approached the house. 42 Willow Lane looked like any other home on the block. Neatly trimmed lawn, white picket fence, a pumpkin on the porch, and a nod to the upcoming Halloween season. The package in my hands was unremarkable, a plain brown box about the size of a shoebox, addressed to a Ms. Eleanor Whitaker. I rang the doorbell, shifting my weight from one foot to the other as I waited. After a moment, I heard shuffling footsteps from inside, and the door creaked open. The woman who answered was exactly what you'd expect in a place like this. Silver hair neatly permed, glasses perched on her nose, a cardigan draped over her shoulders despite the mild weather. She smiled warmly, reminding me of my own grandmother. "Ms. Whitaker," I asked, holding out my electronic signature pad. "I have a package for you." "Oh, yes, dear, I've been expecting this," she said, her voice warm and a bit quavery. She took the pad, signing with a shaky hand. As I handed her the package, our fingers brushed, and that's when it happened. It was like watching a special effect in a movie, except this was happening right in front of me in broad daylight. Ms. Whitaker's face rippled. That's the only word I can think of to describe it. Her features blurred and shifted, like a reflection in disturbed water. When they settled again, I was looking at an entirely different person. Gone was the kindly grandmother. In her place stood a woman in her 30s, with sharp features and eyes that seemed to glow with an inner light. I stumbled back, nearly falling off the porch. "What the hell?" The woman, or whatever she was, cursed under her breath. "You weren't supposed to see that," she said, her voice now crisp and clear without a hint of a quaver. I turned to run, but before I could take a step, I felt a hand on my arm. Her grip was like iron, far stronger than any human should be. "I'm afraid I can't let you leave," she said. "Not until we've had a little chat. Next thing I knew, I was sitting in Ms. Whitaker's, or whoever she was, living room. The interior of the house was at odds with its exterior. Where I expected doilies and china cats, I found sleek, modern furniture and walls covered in strange, swirling symbols. The woman sat across from me, the package on the coffee table between us. She'd made no move to open it. "What? What are you?" I managed to ask, my mouth dry. She sighed, looking almost regretful. The term would be shapeshifter, though that doesn't really capture the full scope of what I am. My mind reeled. Shapeshifters weren't real. They were the stuff of movies and late-night TV shows, not something you encountered on a routine delivery in Connecticut. "This isn't possible," I said, more to myself than to her. She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I assure you, it's very possible. There's a world beyond what most humans see, mister." She glanced at my name tag, Raymond. "A world of beings and powers that your kind has forgotten or chosen to ignore." I looked at the package on the table. "What's in the box?" "Nothing you need to concern yourself with," she said sharply. Then her expression softened slightly. "Look, I don't want to hurt you. You seem like a decent man, Raymond, but I need to know that you won't speak of what you've seen here today." I laughed, a bit hysterically. "Who would believe me?" "You'd be surprised," she said grimly. "There are those who hunt my kind who would love to know our whereabouts, which is why I need your silence." As she spoke, her form rippled again. This time she took on my appearance. It was like looking in a mirror, except the reflection was smirking at me in a way I never would. "I could take your place, you know," my doppelganger said in my own voice. "Go back to your job, your life. No one would ever know the difference." Fear gripped me. "You wouldn't—" The shapeshifter changed back to the sharp-featured woman. "No, I wouldn't. Not if I don't have to. I'm not a monster, Raymond, despite what you might think. I'm just trying to survive in a world that doesn't know we exist." I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. "So what happens now?" She leaned forward, her eyes boring into mine. "Now you have a choice. You can walk out that door and try to forget what you've seen. Go back to your life, deliver your packages, and never speak of this to anyone. Or, I prompted when she trailed off. Or you can learn the truth. About me. About the world you've been blind to all your life. It won't be easy and it will change everything, but you'll see wonders beyond your wildest imagination." I stared at her, my mind whirling. Part of me wanted to run to get as far away from this insanity as possible. But another part, a part I didn't even know existed until that moment, was intrigued. "If I choose to learn," I said slowly, "what does that mean?" She smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. "It means you'll become part of our world, a messenger of sorts using your job to help us stay hidden, to deliver things that need to remain secret. And if I refuse?" Her expression hardened. "Then you walk out that door and forget everything, and I'll be watching to make sure you do." I looked around the room at the strange symbols on the walls, at the package that had led me into this impossible situation. I thought about my life, the monotony of daily deliveries, the loneliness of the road, and I thought about the glimpse I'd gotten of something more, something magical and terrifying and thrilling all at once. In that moment, I made a decision that would change my life forever. "I want to learn," I said. The shapeshifter's face broke into a genuine smile. "I was hoping you'd say that." She stood, extending her hand to me. As I took it, I felt a tingling sensation run up my arm. The world around me seemed to shimmer and shift, revealing layers of reality I'd never seen before. "Welcome to the truth, Raymond," she said. "Your first lesson begins now." As she led me deeper into the house, I knew my life as a simple delivery driver was over. Of shadows and secrets, of beings that defied explanation and truths that would shake the foundations of everything I thought I knew. But as terrifying as it was, I felt more alive than I had in years. Because now, every delivery could be an adventure, every package a mystery. I was no longer just a cog in the machine of commerce. I was a keeper of secrets, a protector of hidden truths. And as I followed the shapeshifter into my new life, I couldn't help but smile, because suddenly the world was full of possibilities I'd never dreamed of. So the next time you see a delivery truck rumbling down your street, remember, it might be carrying more than just your online shopping. It might be carrying secrets of a world beyond your imagination, delivered by someone who's seen behind the veil of reality. And who knows, maybe one day it'll be your turn to sign for a package that changes everything. Story 9. The voice on my CB radio sounded just like my wife's, but I knew it couldn't be her. Sarah was 1,500 miles away, safe at home with our kids. So why was I hearing her terrified screams coming through the tinny speaker of my Peterbilt's radio? Jack, please help me. They're here. They're in the house. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles turning white as I tried to steady my nerves. The lonely stretch of Arizona highway seemed to stretch endlessly before me, the moonlight casting eerie shadows across the desert landscape. This isn't real, I muttered to myself, reaching to turn off the radio. But I couldn't bring myself to silence it. What if, by some impossible chance, it really was Sarah? The voice came again, this time sounding like my 10-year-old daughter. Daddy, please come home. There's monsters, Daddy. They're gonna get us. My stomach churned. I'd been driving trucks for 20 years, and I'd heard stories of weird things happening on the night roads. Ghostly hitchhikers, phantom trucks, even UFOs. But nothing like this. I grabbed the radio mic, my hand shaking. This isn't funny, I growled into it. Whoever's doing this, knock it off. For a moment there was only static, then a low chuckle that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It didn't sound human. Oh, Jack, came my wife's voice again, but now it was all wrong. Too smooth, too cold. Don't you want to save your family? All you have to do is pull over. Stop the truck. We're waiting for you just up ahead. I squinted into the darkness. The road ahead was empty, but about a mile down I could see the glowing signs of a gas station. Part of me wanted to put the pedal to the floor and blow past it, but the thought of abandoning my family, even if this was just some sick joke, made me feel like a coward. As I neared the gas station, I saw a figure standing at the edge of the light spill. My heart leapt into my throat. It looked like Sarah, her blonde hair shining in the fluorescent glare. I slowed the truck, pulling off onto the shoulder about 100 yards from the gas station. Every instinct screamed at me to keep driving, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from the silhouette of my wife. With shaking hands, I turned off the engine and grabbed the flashlight I kept in the cab. As I climbed down from the truck, the night air hit me like a physical force. It was cold, much colder than it should have been, even for a desert night. Sarah, I called out, my voice sounding small and afraid in the vast emptiness around me. The figure didn't move or respond. As I got closer, I realized something was off about its proportions. It was too tall, too thin. I was about 50 feet away when it turned to face me. The flashlight beam illuminated its features, and I stumbled backward with a choked cry of terror. It had Sarah's face, but it was all wrong. Tight over impossible angles, the mouth a gash that split the lower half of the face, and the eyes. The eyes were black pits that seemed to draw in the light. What's wrong, Jack? It said in Sarah's voice, the mouth moving in a way that human lips never could. Don't you want to kiss your wife? I turned to run, but my legs felt like lead. The thing that wasn't Sarah moved with unnatural speed, closing the distance between us in the blink of an eye. Cold, dry fingers clasped around my arm. I could feel the wrongness of them even through my jacket. I yanked away, my feet slipping in the loose gravel of the roadside. As I fell, I saw more shapes emerging from the darkness. Some looked like my children, others like fellow truckers I knew. All had the same stretched, wrong faces and hollow eyes. You shouldn't drive alone at night, Jack, said a chorus of familiar voices. There are such dangerous things out here. I scrambled backward, panting, my mind reeling as it tried to make sense of what I was seeing. This couldn't be real. Maybe I'd fallen asleep at the wheel. Maybe this was all some vivid hallucination brought on by too many hours on the road. But the pain as sharp rocks dug into my palms felt real enough. The cold night air burning in my lungs felt real. And the bone-deep terror coursing through me was definitely undeniably real. One of the things wearing the warped face of my son stepped closer. We've been so lonely, Dad. Won't you stay with us? No, I managed to croak out. You're not real. You're not my family. The thing cocked its head at an impossible angle, reminding me of a curious bird. We're as real as anything out here, Jack. More real than the miles you drive, more real than the life you left behind. I got to my feet, unsteady but determined. Whatever these things were, I wasn't going to die on my knees in front of them. "What do you want from me?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice from shaking. The Sarah thing smiled, its mouth stretching wider than any human mouth should. "We want you to join us, Jack, to become part of our family. Don't you see we can be together forever out here?" As it spoke, I noticed something. The gas station behind them flickered like a mirage in the desert heat. But it was the middle of the night. I squinted, focusing on the buildings and pumps. They seemed to waver, becoming transparent for brief moments. A crazy idea formed in my mind. These things, whatever they were, had been trying to lure me off the road. They had used the voices of my loved ones, created this whole scene. But what if it was all just an illusion? I took a deep breath, steeling myself. Then, with a yell that was part battle cry and part scream of terror, I charged forward. The things reached for me with long, spindly fingers, their faces morphing into expressions of hunger and rage. I felt cold touches on my skin, like icy needles trying to dig into my flesh. But I didn't stop. I ran straight through the group of them, heading for my truck. As I passed through the spot where the gas station had appeared to be, the air shimmered around me. For a moment, I felt like I was running through thick syrup. Then I was through, gasping and stumbling, but alive. Behind me, I heard inhuman shrieks of frustration. I reached my truck, yanking the door open and hurling myself inside. My hands shook so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. In my rearview mirror, I could see the things gathering at the edge of some invisible boundary. They paced back and forth like angry wolves, their forms flickering and changing. The engine roared to life, and I pulled back onto the road, tires squealing. As I accelerated away, I saw the entire scene in my mirror simply vanish, like someone had flipped a switch. The creatures were there, the next there was nothing but empty desert. I drove through the night in a daze, my mind struggling to process what had happened. When the sun finally rose, painting the desert in shades of pink and gold, I pulled over at a real rest stop. My hands were still shaking as I pulled out my phone. Sarah answered on the second ring. "Jack, is everything okay? You never call this early?" The sound of her real voice, warm and sleep-muddled and blessedly human, brought tears to my eyes. "Yeah, everything's fine," I managed to say. Just wanted to hear your voice. Tell the kids I love them, okay?" After I hung up, I sat in my truck for a long time, watching the morning sun climb higher in the sky. I knew I could never tell anyone what had happened last night. Who would believe me? But I also knew I'd never forget. From now on, I'd be more careful on those long night drives. I'd be wary of mysterious radio calls and lonely gas stations appearing out of nowhere, because now I knew the truth. We're not alone out here on the long, dark roads. There are things waiting in the shadows, wearing familiar faces, hungry for something I couldn't begin to understand. And they know how to call your name. Story 10. The crackle of static from my CB radio was nothing unusual, but the panicked voice that cut through it sent a chill down my spine. "Mayday! Mayday! Something's dragging me under!" The words were followed by a blood-curdling scream that abruptly cut off, leaving only the hiss of dead air in its wake. I gripped the steering wheel of my Kenworth, knuckles white, as I peered through the windshield at the storm-darkened sky. The two-lane highway stretched out before me, bordered on both sides by dense pine forest. Up ahead, I could see the shimmer of Blackwater Lake, a massive body of water that had claimed more than its fair share of lives over the years. My name's Mike Callahan, and I've been hauling freight across the country for nearly 3 decades. In all my years on the road, I'd heard my share of strange things over the CB, but nothing like this. The fear in that trucker's voice was real, raw in a way that made my stomach churn. I slowed the rig as I approached the bridge that spanned the narrowest part of the lake. Rain pelted the windshield and lightning flashed in the distance, illuminating the choppy surface of the water. That's when I saw it. A set of taillights, barely visible above the waves about 50 yards from shore. "Jesus Christ," I muttered, pulling onto the shoulder and grabbing for my radio mic. "This is Lone Wolf calling any units in the area of Blackwater Lake. We've got a truck in the water, possible driver in distress. Over." I waited, but there was no response, just static. Cursing under my breath, I reached for my cell phone, only to find there was no signal. Of course not. This stretch of road was notorious for dead zones. I knew I should stay put and wait for help. but the image of those taillights sinking into the murky water gnawed at me. What if the driver was still alive in there? Before I could talk myself out of it, I was out of the cab and jogging towards the lake's edge, the rain soaking through my jacket in seconds. The water was black as oil, choppy waves slapping against the rocky shore. "Hey!" I shouted, cupping my hands around my mouth. "Can anyone hear me?" Only the rumble of thunder answered. I waded into the shallows, the icy water numbing my legs almost instantly. The taillights were still visible, but they were lower now, as if the truck was sinking faster. I took a deep breath and started swimming, powerful strokes carrying me towards the submerged vehicle. As I got closer, I could make out the shape of a semi's trailer, its white surface ghostly beneath the water. But something was wrong. Vertically, as if it had driven nose first off a cliff rather than skidded into the lake from the road. I was about 10 yards away when the taillights finally disappeared beneath the surface. "No!" I shouted, pushing myself harder. When I reached the spot where I'd last seen the lights, I took a deep breath and dove. The water was murky, visibility near zero. I groped blindly, expecting to feel the smooth metal of the trailer. Instead, my hand brushed against something slimy and yielding. I recoiled, a stream of bubbles escaping my mouth in surprise. That's when I felt it. A current, stronger than any lake should have, tugging at my legs. I kicked hard, trying to swim back to the surface, but it was like fighting against a riptide. The murky water swirled around me, and a sound like rushing water filled my ears. Just as my lungs were about to burst, I broke the surface, gasping and sputtering. But the rain had stopped. In fact, as my eyes adjusted, I realized I wasn't in the lake at all. I was in some kind of underground cavern, floating in a pool of black water. Bioluminescent fungi clung to the walls, casting an eerie blue glow over everything. "What the hell?" I muttered, treading water as I tried to make sense of my surroundings. "Help! Somebody help me!" The shout echoed off the cavern walls. I spun in the water, searching for the source. There, about 20 yards away, I saw a man clinging to what looked like a piece of floating debris. Even in the dim light, I could make out the logo on his jacket. He was a trucker just like me. I swam towards him, my muscles protesting after the struggle with the current. As I got closer, I could see the terror in his eyes. "Thank God," he said as I reached him. I thought I was done for. "What happened?" I asked, grabbing onto the debris, which I now saw was a wooden pallet to rest. "How did we get down here?" The man shook his head, his eyes wide. "I don't know. One minute I was driving across the bridge, the next my truck was sinking. But it wasn't sinking into a lake. It was like something pulled us down into this place. A splash from somewhere in the darkness made us both jump. "We need to get out of here," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Which way did you come from?" He pointed towards a dark opening in the cavern wall. "There's a kind of beach over there. I was trying to swim to it when—" His voice trailed off and he shuddered. "When what?" Something grabbed me, tried to pull me under. That's when I found this pallet and called for help on my radio. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold water. "Okay, let's head for that beach. Stay close to me." We started swimming, pushing the pallet ahead of us. The splashing sounds continued, sometimes closer, sometimes farther away. More than once I felt something brush against my legs, but I forced myself to keep going. We were about halfway to the shore when I heard it. A low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The trucker whimpered beside me. "Keep going," I said through gritted teeth. "We're almost there." That's when I saw it. A shape moving beneath the surface of the water. It was massive, easily as big as my semi. As it passed under us, I caught a glimpse of scales and a row of spines breaking the surface. "Oh, God," the other trucker moaned. "It's coming back around." He was right. The thing was circling us, each pass bringing it closer. I could see now that it had multiple tentacles, each as thick as a man's torso, trailing behind a body that looked like a monstrous fusion of eel and squid. "When I say now," I whispered, "we swim for shore as fast as we can. Forget the pallet. Just go." The creature circled once more, then turned sharply, heading straight for us. Surface, revealing rows of dagger-like teeth. "Now," I shouted. We both abandoned the pallet and swam with everything we had. I could hear the rush of water as the monster surged after us. Something slimy wrapped around my ankle, and I kicked frantically, feeling whatever it was lose its grip. My hands hit rocky ground, and I scrambled onto the shore, turning to help the other trucker. He was right behind me, panic giving him speed. Just as he reached the shallows, a tentacle shot out of the water, wrapping around his waist. "No!" I shouted, lunging forward to grab his outstretched hand. For a moment, we were locked in a tug-of-war with the unseen monster. I could feel my grip slipping, the man's terror-filled eyes locked on mine. Then, with a strength born of desperation, I heaved backward. The trucker came free with a splash, and we both tumbled onto the rocky beach. Behind us, the creature roared in frustration, but it didn't follow us onto land. We lay there for a moment, gasping for breath. Then the other trucker started to laugh, a high, slightly hysterical sound. "We made it," he wheezed. "I don't know how, but we made it." I sat up, surveying our surroundings. The beach was small, leading to a narrow tunnel that seemed to slope upward. "We're not out of this yet," I said, getting to my feet. "Come on, let's see where that tunnel leads." As we made our way up the tunnel, the air grew warmer and drier. After what felt like hours of climbing, we emerged into a forest clearing. The storm had passed, and early morning sunlight filtered through the trees. We stumbled onto the highway, waving down the first car we saw. The driver, an elderly man, looked at us like we were crazy when we told him our story, but he drove us to the nearest truck stop anyway. As we sat in the diner drinking coffee and waiting for the police to arrive, the other trucker, Tom was his name, looked at me with haunted eyes. "You think anyone will believe us?" he asked. I shook my head. "Probably not, but we know what happened. And next time I'm driving past Blackwater Lake, you can bet I'll be taking the long way around." Tom nodded solemnly. "Amen to that, brother. Amen to that." As we fell into exhausted silence, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd glimpsed something not meant for human eyes. A world beneath our world, filled with dangers beyond imagination. And I knew that every time I got behind the wheel from now on, I'd be listening to my CB with new ears, wondering what other secrets the long, dark road might be hiding. Story 11. The first thud against the side of my truck sounded like a fallen branch. The second, like a bear scratching an itch. But when I heard the unmistakable sound of feet, big feet pounding the pavement behind me, I knew I was in for a night that would change my life forever. My name's Frank Holloway, and I've been driving big rigs through the Pacific Northwest for the better part of 3 decades. I've seen my share of weird stuff on these lonely mountain roads, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened that night in the Cascade Mountains. It was a typical late autumn run, hauling a load of electronics from Seattle to Boise. The sun had set hours ago, leaving me alone with the hum of my engine and the glow of my dashboard lights. The winding mountain road was empty, which wasn't unusual for this time of night. What was unusual was the fog. It had rolled in fast, thick as pea soup, forcing me to slow to a crawl. My headlights barely penetrated the gloom, turning the world outside my windshield into a swirling gray void. I leaned forward, squinting, every muscle tense as I navigated the hairpin turns. That's when I heard the first thud. I jolted in my seat, my heart racing. "Just a branch," I muttered to myself, trying to calm my nerves. There hadn't been any trees overhanging the road for the last few miles. The second impact came a minute later, harder this time. The whole truck shuddered. I grabbed my CB radio, thinking to call for help, but all I got was static. Of course, reception was always spotty up here. Then I heard it, the sound of running, but this wasn't the quick patter of a deer or even the loping gait of a bear. This was the rhythmic pounding of feet, big feet, and they were keeping pace with my truck. I stepped on the gas, my palms sweaty on the wheel. Whatever was out there, I didn't want it catching up to me. The engine roared as I took the turns faster than I should have, the trailer swaying dangerously behind me. A shape loomed in my driver's side mirror. At first, I thought it was a bear running on its hind legs. But as it drew closer, I realized with a jolt of primal fear that this was no bear. It was too tall, too human-like. Its face appeared in my side mirror, and I felt my blood turn to ice. It was covered in thick, matted fur, with a sloped forehead and deep-set eyes that glowed in the red light of my taillights. Its mouth was open in a silent roar, revealing rows of yellowed teeth. Sasquatch. The word popped into my mind unbidden, but that was impossible. Bigfoot was a myth, a campfire story. It couldn't be real. The creature slammed into the side of my truck again, harder than before. The impact sent me skidding towards the edge of the road. Beyond the guardrail, I could see nothing but swirling fog and the yawning abyss of the mountainside. I wrestled with the wheel, my heart pounding in my ears. If I went over the edge, they'd never find me. I'd become another mysterious disappearance in these mountains. The Sasquatch appeared in my mirror again, closer this time. I could see the muscles rippling under its fur as it ran. It was easily 8 feet tall, its arms longer than any human's, ending in massive hands with curved claws. It reached for the back of my trailer, its claws screeching against the metal. I winced at the sound, imagining those claws tearing through the thin shell of my cab. Come on, I muttered, urging my truck forward. But the fog was too thick, the road too treacherous. One wrong move and I'd plummet to my death. The creature roared, a sound so deep and primal it shook me to my core. I'd heard bears and mountain lions before, but this was something else entirely. This was the sound of something that shouldn't exist. I rounded another turn and my headlights illuminated a tunnel ahead. Hope surged through me. If I could make it to the tunnel, maybe the creature wouldn't follow. Maybe it was afraid of enclosed spaces. I floored it, pushing my rig to its limits. The Sasquatch kept pace, its massive form a blur of motion in my mirrors. Just as I thought it was going to catch me, I plunged into the darkness of the tunnel. The sound of my engine echoed off the concrete walls, deafening in the enclosed space. I held my breath, waiting for the impact of the creature slamming into my trailer. But it never came. I emerged from the other side of the tunnel, immediately hitting the brakes. My truck screeched to a halt, the trailer jackknifing slightly. I sat there, panting, my hands shaking on the wheel. Slowly, I turned to look out my back window. The tunnel mouth gaped like a black maw in the mountainside. But there was no sign of the Sasquatch. I let out a shaky laugh, relief washing over me. Maybe I'd imagined it all. Maybe the long hours in the fog had played tricks on my mind. That's when I saw the footprints. They led out of the tunnel and off the road, disappearing into the underbrush. Each print was easily 2 feet long with clear impressions of 5 toes. No bear made tracks like that. I'm staring at those footprints, my worldview crumbling around me. Everything I thought I knew about the natural world had just been turned on its head. Eventually, I put the truck in gear and started driving again. I had a delivery to make after all. But as I continued down the mountain, my mind raced. Should I tell someone? Would anyone believe me? I had no proof beyond my own account and those footprints, which would likely be gone by morning. As I drove, I thought about all the stories I'd heard over the years. Truckers talking about strange sightings in the mountains, hikers going missing without a trace. I'd always dismissed them as tall tales or unfortunate accidents. Now I wasn't so sure. When I finally reached the truck stop in Boise, I was exhausted but too wired to sleep. I sat in the diner nursing a cup of coffee, debating what to do. That's when I overheard a conversation from the next booth. 2 truckers talking in hushed tones about a strange experience one of them had had in the Cascades. My ears perked up. I'm telling you, Joe, it was huge. Ran alongside my truck for a good mile before disappearing into the woods. I've never seen anything like it. I turned in my seat, catching the eye of the trucker who'd been speaking. He looked at me warily, probably expecting ridicule. Instead, I gave him a nod of understanding. I believe you, I said simply. The relief on his face was palpable. He slid over, making room for me in the booth, and I joined them. For the next hour, we swapped stories, each of us describing our encounters with something that defied explanation. As I listened, I realized something. Maybe the truth about what lived in those mountains wasn't meant to be shouted from the rooftops or splashed across headlines. Maybe it was meant to be shared like this, in quiet conversations between those who had seen it firsthand. We were the guardians of a secret, a glimpse into a world beyond what most people could imagine. And in sharing our stories, we formed a bond, a brotherhood of the road united by our brush with the unknown. As I finally headed to my bunk for some much-needed sleep, I felt a strange sense of peace. The world was bigger and more mysterious than I'd ever imagined, and I was one of the few who knew it. From that night on, every time I drove through those mountains, I kept a watchful eye on the woods beside the road. And sometimes, when the fog rolled in thick and the night was at its darkest, I could swear I saw a large, shadowy figure moving among the trees, keeping pace with my truck. But I wasn't afraid anymore. Instead, I felt a sense of wonder, because now I knew that the greatest adventures, the most incredible discoveries, could happen on even the most ordinary of nights. All it took was an open mind and the courage to face the unknown. And as for that Sasquatch, well, I like to think he's still out there, running free in the wilderness. A reminder that there's still magic in the world if you know where to look for it. Story 12. The first one I saw could have been a trick of the light. The second, a figment of my imagination. But by the time I counted a dozen of those impossibly tall, unnaturally thin figures standing motionless along the fog-shrouded highway, I knew I was in for the longest night of my life. My name's Charlie Reeves, and I've been hauling freight across the country for the better part of 2 decades. I've seen my fair share of strange things on these lonely roads, but nothing could have prepared me for what I encountered on that misty stretch of Highway 12 in eastern Washington. It was just past midnight, and I was pushing through the last leg of a cross-country haul from Boston to Seattle. The fog had rolled in thick about an hour ago, forcing me to slow to a crawl. The gloom, turning the world outside my windshield into a swirling gray void. I leaned forward, squinting, every muscle tense as I navigated the twisting road. That's when I saw it. A dark silhouette looming at the edge of my headlight's reach. At first, I thought it was a road sign, but as I drew closer, I realized it was far too tall and thin. My breath caught in my throat as I passed it. In the split second it was illuminated by my lights, I saw that it was vaguely humanoid but stretched to impossible proportions. It had to be at least 12 feet tall, with limbs like pencils and a head that seemed too small for its body. And it was completely motionless. I shook my head, blinking hard. "Get it together, Charlie," I muttered to myself. "You're just tired. It's nothing but a trick of the light." But even as I said it, I knew I was lying to myself. What I'd seen was too vivid, too detailed to be a mere illusion. I tried to focus on the road ahead, but my eyes kept darting to the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that eerily tall figure following me. There was nothing there but swirling mist. Just as I was starting to relax, convincing myself it had been a product of my fatigue-addled mind, I saw another one. This time it was on the opposite side of the road, standing just as still as the first. As I passed, I could have sworn its head turned to follow my truck, though the rest of its body remained perfectly stationary. My hands tightened on the wheel, knuckles turning white. This couldn't be happening. It had to be some kind of elaborate prank. But who would set up something like this in the middle of nowhere in the dead of night? I reached for my CB radio, thinking to call for help or at least see if any other drivers had seen these things. But all I got was static. Of course. Reception was always spotty in these parts. The next one appeared about a half-mile down the road. Then another, and another. Soon I was seeing them every few hundred yards, always standing perfectly still at the edge of the road, their impossibly thin bodies barely visible in the fog until I was right upon them. I wanted to floor it, to speed past these unnatural sentinels and leave them in my dust. But the fog was too thick, the road too treacherous. One wrong move and I'd end up wrapped around a tree or plummeting down an embankment. So I crept along, my heart pounding in my chest, as the parade of strange figures continued. Some stood alone, while others appeared in groups of 2 or 3. All were identical in their unsettling proportions and eerie stillness. As I passed the dozenth one, a horrible thought struck me. What if they weren't statues or some kind of sick roadside art installation? What if they were alive? The idea sent a chill down my spine. I found myself holding my breath as I passed each one, terrified that this would be the one that moved, that reached out with those impossibly long arms, and I shook my head, trying to banish the thought. I needed to stay focused, to keep my wits about me. Panicking wouldn't do me any good. That's when I saw the gas station looming out of the fog ahead. It was an old, run-down place, the kind you'd expect to see in a horror movie. But at that moment, it looked like salvation. I pulled in, the gravel crunching under my tires. The place seemed deserted, but there was a light on inside the small convenience store. I sat in my cab for a long moment, debating whether I should go in. On one hand, I desperately wanted to talk to another human being, to confirm that I wasn't losing my mind. On the other, the thought of leaving the relative safety of my truck filled me with dread. In the end, my need for human contact won out. I grabbed my flashlight and climbed down from the cab, my eyes darting nervously around the empty lot. From all sides, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The bell above the door jingled as I entered the store. Behind the counter stood an old man with a weathered face and eyes that seemed to have seen too much. He didn't look surprised to see me. "Rough night out there?" he asked, his voice gravelly. I nodded, not sure how to broach the subject of what I'd seen. "Yeah, you could say that. This fog is something else." The old man grunted. "Fog's not the worst of it, I reckon. Not by a long shot." My heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" He fixed me with a piercing stare. "You've seen them, haven't you? The Watchers." I felt the blood drain from my face. "The Watchers?" "Them tall, skinny fellas out on the road, standing still as statues until you look away. Then they move." A chill ran down my spine. "What are they?" The old man shrugged. "Nobody knows for sure. Some say they're aliens. Others reckon they're some kind of interdimensional beings. Me? I think there's something that was here long before us and will be here long after we're gone." I swallowed hard, trying to process this information. "How long have they been here?" "Far as I know, they've always been here. But they only show themselves on nights like this when the fog rolls in thick." He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a whisper. "And they're not just watching, you know, they're waiting." "Waiting for what?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. The old man's eyes twinkled with a mix of fear and excitement. For someone to stop, to get out of their vehicle and approach them. Ain't nobody ever come back who's done that. I felt my legs go weak and I had to grip the counter to stay upright. "What happens to them?" He shook his head. "Nobody knows. But on nights after it happens, the Watchers are always a little bit closer to the road, like they're getting bolder." I stood there for a long moment, my mind reeling. Part of me wanted to dismiss this as the ramblings of a crazy old man. But after what I'd seen out there, I couldn't bring myself to disbelieve him. "What should I do?" I asked, hating how small and scared my voice sounded. The old man's expression softened slightly. "Keep driving. Don't stop no matter what you see or hear. And whatever you do, don't get out of your truck until you're well clear of this stretch of road." I nodded, grateful for the advice even as it terrified me. "Thank you," I said, turning to leave. "One more thing," the old man called after me. I paused at the door, looking back. "If you make it through, don't tell too many people what you saw. Most folks ain't ready to know what's really out there in the dark." With those ominous words ringing in my ears, I hurried back to my truck. As I climbed into the cab, I could have sworn I saw a tall, thin figure standing at the edge of the parking lot, barely visible in the fog. But when I looked again, it was gone. I started the engine and pulled back onto the highway, my eyes constantly scanning the roadside. The Watchers were still there, appearing out of the mist every few hundred yards. But now, knowing what I knew, they seemed even more menacing. I drove through the night, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, jumping at every shadow and flicker of movement in my peripheral vision. It felt like the longest drive of my life. As dawn broke, the fog began to thin. The Watchers became less frequent and then stopped appearing altogether. By the time the sun had fully risen, painting the sky in brilliant shades of pink and gold, there was no sign that anything out of the ordinary had happened. I finally reached my destination in Seattle, exhausted but alive. As I unloaded my cargo, I debated whether to tell anyone about what I'd seen. It seemed so fantastical, so unbelievable. In the end, I kept it to myself, save for a few close trucker friends who'd had their own strange experiences on the road. We'd talk about it late at night over beers, sharing our stories in hushed tones. But every time I drive that stretch of Highway 12 now, especially when the fog rolls in, I keep a watchful eye on the roadside, and sometimes when the mist is at its thickest, I could swear I see tall, thin figures standing in the distance, watching and waiting. They're still out there, I'm sure of it, and I can't help but wonder, what are they waiting for? And what will happen when their patience finally runs out? Story 13. The moment I pulled that child from the wreckage, I knew something was terribly wrong. It wasn't the blank stare or the unnatural stillness that unnerved me. It was the weight. No 8-year-old should feel as heavy as a grown man. My name's Derek Hawkins, and I've been driving semis for over 15 years. I've seen my share of accidents and helped out where I could, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened that night on a lonely stretch of Nevada highway. It was just past midnight, and I was hauling a load of electronics from Reno to Las Vegas. The road was empty, nothing but darkness and desert stretching out on either side. My high beams cut through the night, illuminating the cracked asphalt and the occasional scrubby bush. I was just starting to feel the fatigue creeping in when I saw it. A plume of smoke rising from the side of the road about a quarter mile ahead. As I got closer, I could make out the crumpled form of a car, flipped on its side and wrapped around a large boulder. My heart raced as I pulled over, grabbing my flashlight and first aid kit before jumping down from the cab. The night was eerily quiet, no screams or calls for help, just the faint crackling of flames from the car's engine. "Hello?" I called out, jogging towards the wreck. "Anyone there? Can you hear me?" No response. As I reached the car, I could see that the driver's side had taken the brunt of the impact. The metal was twisted and compressed, leaving little hope for whoever had been behind the wheel. I was about to check the driver when I heard it, a faint tapping coming from the back seat. My breath caught in my throat. There was a child in there. I scrambled around to the other side of the car, shining my flashlight through the cracked rear window. 2 eyes reflected the light back at me, unblinking. "Hey there," I said, trying to keep my voice calm and steady. "I'm here to help. Can you move, No response, but the tapping continued. It was methodical, almost mechanical in its rhythm. The rear door was jammed, but the window was shattered enough that I thought I could pull the kid out. I reached in, my hands finding small shoulders. "I'm going to get you out of there, okay? Just hold on." I started to pull, and that's when I felt it. The child was impossibly heavy, like trying to lift a statue. But somehow I managed to drag them through the window, my arms straining with the effort. As soon as I got them clear of the car, I knew something was very, very wrong. The child, a boy, maybe 8 or 9 years old, stood perfectly still, his eyes fixed on some point in the distance. He was pale, almost luminescent in the moonlight, and there wasn't a scratch on him despite the severity of the crash. "Are you hurt?" I asked, kneeling down to his level. "What's your name?" His head swiveled towards me, the movement too smooth, too precise. When he spoke, his voice was flat and emotionless. "This unit is undamaged. Designation Alex..." I recoiled, nearly falling backwards. What are you..." Alex's head tilted to the side, an eerily perfect 45-degree angle. Mechanical interface designed for human interaction and data collection. Creator's status, terminated. Seeking new operator. My mind reeled, trying to process what I was hearing. This wasn't a child. It was some kind of robot or android or... I didn't even know what to call it. "Your creator," I said slowly. "Was that the driver?" Alex nodded, the movement unnaturally fluid. "Affirmative. Creator Dr. Emily Chen has ceased biological functions. This unit requires a new operator to continue its mission." I glanced back at the wreck, a wave of sadness washing over me. Whatever this thing was, someone had died creating it. "I'm sorry about Dr. Chen, but I don't understand. What mission? Who made you?" "Information classified," Alex replied. "This unit can only divulge mission parameters to its designated operator. You have initiated the rescue protocol. Do you consent to become this unit's new operator?" Warning bells went off in my head. This was way above my pay grade. I needed to call the police or the FBI or someone who dealt with whatever the hell this was. "Look, Alex," I said, taking a step back. I'm just a truck driver. I can't be your new operator, but I can help you find someone who can, okay? Why don't you come with me to my truck and we'll call for help?" Alex's eyes narrowed slightly, the first real expression I'd seen on its face. "Negative. Rescue protocol dictates that the first human to initiate contact becomes the new operator. You are not authorized to decline." A chill ran down my spine. "What do you mean I'm not authorized to decline?" Instead of answering, Alex took a step towards me. Despite its small size, there was something undeniably menacing about the movement. I backed away, my heart pounding. "Listen, kid, or whatever you are, I'm sorry, but I can't help you. I need to call this in, get the proper authorities involved." I turned to head back to my truck, but I'd only taken a few steps when I felt a hand grasp my arm. Alex's grip was like iron, its strength inhuman. "You will comply," it said, its voice taking on a metallic edge. "Resistance will be met with corrective measures." Fear surged through me. I yanked my arm away and ran, sprinting towards my truck. I could hear Alex behind me, its footsteps unnaturally fast and rhythmic. I reached the cab and scrambled inside, slamming the door and locking it. Through the side mirror, I could see Alex approaching, its movements precise and relentless. My hand shook as I tried to start the engine. It roared to life just as Alex reached the driver's side door. It placed a hand on the window, and to my horror, the glass began to frost over, thin cracks spreading from its touch. I threw the truck into gear and floored it, tires squealing as I pulled away. In the rearview mirror, I saw Alex standing in the middle of the road, watching me go. Its eyes seemed to glow in the red light of my taillights. As I sped down the highway, my mind raced. What the hell had I just encountered? Who was Dr. Chen, and what kind of mission required the creation of a childlike robot with that kind of strength and abilities? I drove through the night, jumping at every shadow, half expecting to see those glowing eyes in my mirrors at any moment. It wasn't until I reached the outskirts of Las Vegas that I finally felt safe enough to stop. I pulled into a truck stop and sat there for a long time, trying to decide what to do. Part of me wanted to pretend it had never happened, to chalk it up to fatigue and an overactive imagination. But I knew what I'd seen was real. In the end, I called the police and reported the accident. I told them about the dead driver, but left out any mention of Alex. Who would believe me? What would happen if the wrong people found out about the existence of such advanced technology? As the days passed, I scoured the news for any mention of the crash or of a missing child. But there was nothing. It was as if Alex and Dr. Chen had never existed. Sometimes late at night when I'm driving down a lonely stretch of highway, I find myself watching the mirrors, half expecting to see a small figure standing in the road behind me. And I can't help but wonder, what was Alex's mission? And now that it's out there, alone and in need of a new operator, what will it do to complete it? I've thought about quitting, about finding a nice, safe job that doesn't involve long nights on empty roads. But the truth is, I feel a responsibility now. Someone needs to be out here keeping an eye out, because if there's one Alex, there might be others. And next time, the person who stops to help might not be so lucky. So I keep driving, hauling my loads across the country. And I watch, and I wait. Because somewhere out there in the vast darkness of the American night, there's a child who isn't a child, with glowing eyes and inhuman strength, searching for its new operator, and God help whoever it finds. Story 14. The antlers came first, piercing through the fog like jagged lightning, then the eyes glowing with an unholy amber light. By the time I saw the twisted, emaciated body, it was already too late. The Wendigo had spotted me, and on these lonely mountain roads there was nowhere to run. My name's Jack Mahoney, and I've been hauling lumber through the forests of northern Minnesota for the better part of 2 decades. I've seen my share of wildlife on these roads, deer, bears, even the occasional wolf. But nothing could have prepared me for what I encountered on that frigid November night. The day had started like any other. I'd loaded up my rig at the mill in International Falls, preparing for the long haul down to Minneapolis. The weather report warned of an early winter storm moving in, but I figured I could outrun it if I pushed through the night. As the sun set, the temperature plummeted. Snow began to fall, softly at first, then in heavy, swirling gusts that reduced visibility to almost nothing. I slowed my rig to a crawl, squinting through the windshield at the narrow, winding road ahead. That's when the radio started acting up. Static crackled through the speakers, punctuated by bursts of what sounded like chanting? I fiddled with the dial, trying to clear the signal, but it only got worse. Low, guttural voices speaking in a language I'd never heard before filled the cab. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold outside. I switched off the radio, preferring the eerie silence to those unsettling sounds. As I rounded a sharp bend, my headlights illuminated a figure standing at the edge of the road. My heart leapt into my throat. Who would be out here in the middle of nowhere in this weather? I slowed even further, peering through the snow. At first I thought it was a man, tall and thin, with something odd about its head. But as I drew closer, I realized with dawning horror that what I was seeing wasn't human at all. It stood at least 8 feet tall, its body a skeletal frame covered in patches of mangy fur. Its arms were impossibly long, ending in hands tipped with wicked claws, but it was the head that made my blood run cold. Massive antlers sprouted from its skull, branching out like a gnarled tree. And its face, God, its face was a nightmare of stretched skin and sharp teeth, with eyes that glowed like hot coals in the darkness. I'd heard the old legends, of course. Every trucker who runs these northern routes knows the stories of the Wendigo, the cursed humans transformed by cannibalism into ever-hungry monsters. As campfire tales meant to scare greenhorn drivers. Now, faced with the reality of the creature before me, those stories came rushing back. The Wendigo, they said, could mimic human voices, luring unsuspecting victims to their doom. They were impossibly fast, inhumanly strong, and always hungry. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles turning white. Maybe if I just kept driving, didn't stop or slow down, it would leave me alone. But as I started to pass it, the Wendigo's head snapped towards me. Those burning eyes locked onto mine, and I felt a wave of hunger and hatred wash over me. Its mouth opened in a silent scream, revealing row upon row of needle-sharp teeth. Then it moved. One moment it was standing by the roadside, the next it was running alongside my truck. Despite its skeletal frame, it kept pace easily, those long arms reaching for my cab. I floored it, terror giving me the courage to take the twisting mountain road at dangerous speeds. The Wendigo matched my acceleration, its claws screeching against the side of my trailer. Through the passenger window, I could see its face, twisted in a rictus of hunger. It opened its mouth again, and this time I heard its voice, a sound that will haunt me for the rest of my days. "Stop," it said in a perfect imitation of my wife's voice. "Jack, please stop. I need your help." I shook my head, trying to clear the sound from my mind. This was how it got you, I realized. It got in your head, made you doubt yourself, made you want to stop and help. "You're not real," I growled through gritted teeth. "You're not her." The Wendigo's expression changed, morphing into a look of hurt and confusion that was so like my wife it made my heart ache. "Jack, why are you doing this? Don't you love me anymore?" I squeezed my eyes shut for a moment, fighting back tears. When I opened them, the Wendigo's face had transformed back into its true, monstrous visage. It snarled, realizing its trick hadn't worked. Suddenly, it leapt onto the hood of my truck. Its weight caused the front end to dip dangerously, and I struggled to keep control on the icy road. The Wendigo's face pressed against the windshield, its hot breath fogging the glass. Those terrible claws began to dig into the metal of the hood, peeling it back like the lid of a sardine can. In desperation, I jerked the wheel hard to the right. The sudden movement caught the Wendigo off guard. It slid off the hood, disappearing into the swirling snow beside the truck. For a moment, I thought I'd lost it. Then I heard a thud from the trailer behind me. The whole truck shook as something heavy landed on the roof. I tried to keep my eyes on the road, but I couldn't help glancing in my side mirror. What I saw made my heart stop. The Wendigo was crawling down the side of the trailer, using its claws to dig into the metal. It was coming for me. In a panic, I looked around for anything I could use as a weapon. My eyes fell on the thermos of coffee sitting in the cup holder. It wasn't much, but it was all I had. As the Wendigo reached the cab, I rolled down the window. The bitter cold rushed in, along with the sound of the creature's labored breathing. I caught a whiff of its scent, like rotting meat and stale blood. Just as its horrible face appeared in the window, I hurled the thermos at it. By some miracle, the cap came off mid-flight. Scalding hot coffee splashed across the Wendigo's face. It shrieked in pain, a sound like tearing metal that set my teeth on edge. Its grip loosened, and for a second I thought it might fall, but the Wendigo was far from defeated. With a roar of rage, it redoubled its efforts to get into the cab. One long arm snaked through the open window, claws grasping for me. I pressed myself against the driver's side door, trying to stay out of reach. My eyes off the road for a crucial moment. The truck hit a patch of black ice. I felt the trailer start to jackknife, the weight of it pushing us towards the edge of the road. I fought with the wheel, but it was no use. We were going over. Time seemed to slow as the truck tipped onto its side. I saw the Wendigo's eyes widen in surprise, its claws scrabbling for purchase as it was thrown clear. Then my world turned upside down as the cab rolled. I must have blacked out for a moment. When I came to, I was hanging upside down, held in place by my seatbelt. The cab was crushed, pinning my legs. Outside, the storm howled, snow already starting to drift in through the shattered windshield. For a long moment, all I could do was hang there, dazed and in pain. Then I heard it, the crunch of footsteps in the snow coming closer. My blood ran cold. The Wendigo had survived the crash, and now, trapped and injured, I was easy prey. I struggled to free myself, but it was useless. I was stuck fast. The footsteps got closer, and I braced myself for the end. But the face that appeared in the broken windshield wasn't the Wendigo's. It was human. A man, middle-aged, with a thick beard and kind eyes. "Hold on, buddy," he said, reaching in to check on me. "Help's on the way. You're going to be okay." As consciousness started to fade again, I caught a glimpse of flashing lights in the distance. The storm was clearing, and with the dawn, the Wendigo had vanished back into the wilderness. I spent weeks in the hospital recovering from the crash. The official report blamed ice and driver fatigue. I didn't bother telling them about the Wendigo. Who would believe me? But I know what I saw that night. And now, every time I get behind the wheel of my rig, I keep a wary eye on the forests that line these northern roads. Because out there, in the darkness between the trees, something ancient and hungry is waiting. And it knows my name. Story 15. The first time I saw the lights, I thought they were just another trucker. The second time, I figured it was a low-flying plane. But when they started moving in ways that defied the laws of physics, I knew I was in for a night that would change my life forever. My name's Mike Callahan, and I've been driving big rigs across the American Southwest for the better part of 3 decades. I've seen my share of strange things out in the desert night, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened on that lonely stretch of New Mexico highway. It was a typical summer night run, hauling a load of electronics from Albuquerque to Phoenix. The sun had set hours ago, leaving me alone with the hum of my engine and the vast, star-filled sky above. The desert stretched out on either side of the highway, an endless sea of darkness broken only by the occasional scrub brush or towering saguaro cactus. I just passed through a little no-name town, nothing more than a gas station and a couple of boarded-up buildings, when I first noticed the lights in my rearview mirror. They were off in the distance, maybe a mile or two behind me, just a pair of pinpricks on the horizon. "About time I had some company," I muttered to myself, settling in for the long haul. But as the minutes ticked by, something started to feel off. The lights weren't getting any closer, but they weren't falling behind either. It was like they were pacing me, keeping a constant distance no matter how my speed fluctuated. I squinted into the mirror, trying to make out the shape of the vehicle behind the lights. But there was nothing there, just those 2 unwavering points of brightness hanging in the darkness. A chill ran down my spine. I'd heard stories, of course. Every trucker who runs these desert routes has tales of strange lights in the sky, unexplained phenomena that defy explanation. It was the product of too many hours on the road and not enough sleep. Now, faced with those eerie lights that seemed to defy the laws of physics, those stories came rushing back. I picked up my CB radio, thinking to see if any other drivers in the area had spotted anything unusual, but all I got was static. Not even the usual chatter of late-night truckers to keep me company. That's when things got really weird. The lights suddenly shot upward, climbing into the sky at a speed no earthly vehicle could match. They hovered there for a moment, high above the highway, before splitting apart. Now there were 4 lights, then 8, then 16, arranging themselves in a perfect circle. My heart was pounding in my chest. This was no plane, no helicopter, no anything I'd ever seen before. As I watched, the circle of lights began to rotate, slowly at first, then faster and faster until it was just a blur of light. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the rotation stopped. The lights hung there for a moment, pulsing with an otherworldly energy, and then they moved. One second they were high in the sky, the next they were right on top of me. My cab was flooded with brilliant white light, so bright I had to shield my eyes. The radio erupted in a burst of static and unearthly screeching that set my teeth on edge. I slammed on the brakes, the truck skidding on the empty highway. As I fought to keep control, I caught glimpses of something massive above me. It was hard to make out through the glare, but I saw sleek metallic surfaces and strange, curved shapes that hurt my eyes to look at directly. The truck came to a shuddering stop, angled across both lanes of the highway. I sat there, hands gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles were white, staring up at the impossible object hovering above me. It was a ship, that much I could tell, but like no ship I'd ever seen or imagined. It seemed to shift and change as I looked at it, as if my mind couldn't quite grasp its true form. Lights pulsed along its surface in mesmerizing patterns, and I felt a strange pressure in my head, like something was trying to push its way into my thoughts. A beam of light, different from the others, shot down from the craft. It swept over my truck once, twice, 3 times. Each pass left me feeling like my skin was crawling, like every atom in my body was being examined and cataloged. I don't know how long I sat there, paralyzed with a mixture of fear and awe. It could have been minutes or hours. Time seemed to lose all meaning in the presence of that otherworldly craft. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the ship began to move away. It rose higher and higher, picking up speed until it was just a pinprick of light among the stars. Then, with a flash that lit up the desert like daylight for a brief moment, it was gone. I sat in my cab for a long time after that, trying to process what I'd seen. Part of me wanted to dismiss it as a hallucination, a product of too many long nights on the road. But I knew in my gut that what I'd experienced was real. With shaking hands, I put the truck back in gear and continued down the highway. My mind was racing, filled with questions I knew I'd never get answers to. What were those lights? Where had they come from? And most importantly, why had they chosen me? As dawn broke over the desert, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, I pulled into a truck stop just outside of Phoenix. I hadn't seen any other vehicles all night, and the normalcy of other trucks and bleary-eyed drivers felt surreal after my encounter. I sat in the diner, nursing a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold, debating what to do. Should I report what I'd seen? But to who? The police? The military? Would anyone even believe me? That's when I overheard a conversation from the next booth. Hushed tones about strange lights they'd seen in the sky the night before. I turned in my seat, catching the eye of one of the drivers. He looked at me warily, probably expecting ridicule. Instead, I gave him a nod of understanding. "I saw them too," I said simply. The relief on his face was palpable. He slid over, making room for me in the booth, and I joined them. For the next hour, we swapped stories, each of us describing our encounters with something that defied explanation. As I listened, I realized something. Maybe the truth about what was out there in the desert night wasn't meant to be shouted from the rooftops or splashed across headlines. Maybe it was meant to be shared like this in quiet conversations between those who had seen it firsthand. We were the guardians of a secret, a glimpse into a world beyond what most people could imagine. And in sharing our stories, we formed a bond, a brotherhood of the road united by our brush with the unknown. As I finally headed to my bunk for some much-needed sleep, I felt a strange sense of peace. The world was bigger and more mysterious than I'd ever imagined, and I was one of the few who knew it. From that night on, every time I drove through the desert, I kept a watchful eye on the sky. The lights never appeared to me again, but I know they're out there, waiting, watching. And sometimes on the loneliest stretches of highway, when the night is at its darkest, I swear I can feel them watching me back. I don't know if they'll ever return or what it would mean if they did, but I do know one thing. The next time I see those strange lights following me through the desert, I won't be afraid. I'll be ready. Because now I know that the greatest adventures, the most incredible discoveries can happen on even the most ordinary of nights. All it takes is an open mind and the courage to face the unknown. And as for those lights, well, I like to think they're still out there, dancing across the desert sky. A reminder that there's still magic in the world if you know where to look for it.